Today we're taking an in-depth look at the Epomaker Tide75, which was sent over by the folks at Epomaker. The Tide75 is a tri-mode, 75% gasket-mounted mechanical keyboard with mostly south-facing hot swap sockets, an E-coated or anodized aluminum case, FR4 plate, volume knob, and VIA compatibility. It's available from Epomaker for $120 to $140 pre-built, with differing switch and keycap options depending on the colorway. I was sent the blue colorway with an E-coated case, Epomaker lemon switches, and backlit OEM profile keycaps with front-facing legends, which all in all costs $140. Epomaker also offers a 65% version, the Tide75, for $106 to $120. For me, the most striking aspect of the Tide75's design is definitely the bold color shared between the case and included keycaps. Well, unless you get the black version, of course. The front printed legends do ruin the aesthetic though with this garish gamer font. I don't personally like blanks, but even I would have preferred blanks over these. The aluminum case is very smooth to the touch with bevels eliminating any sharp edges. The bezel is quite substantial on all four sides, and all in all, it is a pretty big and heavy keyboard. It's got this two-tier design with a slanted rectangular block sitting on top of a wedge. This design also leaves room for your fingers when picking the board up, which is, as always, a nice touch. On the back of the board, along that bottom tier, are the USB port and mode toggle to the left, and a slot for the wireless dongle to the right. On the bottom, you've got 4 fixed rubber feet, 6 screw holes, and a big accent piece that Epomaker describes as mirror PVD. It is a nice design detail, but as I've mentioned in previous videos, I just do not see the point of accent pieces that will never be visible during normal use. The bold blue color is very nice and pretty unique, but other than that, there's not really much about the Tide75 that stands out, which is not necessarily a bad thing since there's also nothing really wrong with its design either. The included Epomaker lemon switch is a 5-pin linear with nylon Kale style housings, a dust-proof palm stem, and a long 22mm spring. There's no information on its bottom out force, but it doesn't feel particularly light or heavy. There is some pretty light pinging when you press it right up against your ear, but during normal typing you can't really hear anything unpleasant. Looking inside, there does seem to be some factory lubing, but it appears to be some kind of thin oil as opposed to a thick lube. On the Tide75's product page, it's described as having south-facing hot swap sockets, but this is actually not entirely true, as for reasons we will see in the next chapter, the spacebar socket is actually north-facing. Fortunately, the lemon switches don't seem to have any interference issues even with cherry profile keycaps. The included keycaps are bad. It's 2024 and we're still getting these old school pre-built keyboard style keycaps with the gamer font, backlit legends, and thin material. I hate it. I really do. You can opt for some better looking keycaps when you buy the Tide75, but seemingly only with the blue and black colorways. To start this teardown of the Tide75, you may want to remove all of the keycaps and switches. Next, pull the knob off and flip the board over. You've got 6 hex screws to undo, and there is a hex tool included with the board. Once these are all undone, flip the board back over and lift the top case piece off. Looking at the underside, you can see that the gaskets are attached to the case instead of to the plate. There are no standoffs here, so the FR4 plate will just come right off. You've got your pretty standard sheets here, thick plate foam, thin sound enhancing foam, and thin plastic. Underneath the PCB, you've got a thick sheet of foam stuck to a thin sheet of plastic. There are 2 cables attached to the PCB, one for the daughter board and the other for the battery. Interestingly, it seems that this PCB can accommodate split space bars, as you can see from the extra hot swap sockets. This also explains why the hot swap socket for the full space bar had to be flipped, making it the lone north-facing key on this keyboard. The plate you get out of the box can only accommodate a full spacebar, and there does not appear to be any option for a split spacebar on the Tide75's product page. Very strange. We're back to loading JSON files in order to use VIA for key mapping, which is sad but ultimately not a big deal. You can use VIA on the web or download it as a standalone app. The JSON file is available from the Tide75 product page. Before you can load this, you'll need to enable the Design tab from the Settings tab in VIA. From the newly activated Design tab, you can then click the Load button and select the JSON file. You can then go to the Configure tab and, if necessary, select the Tide75 from the device dropdown on the upper right. You can now customize key bindings on 5 different layers. By default, layer 0 is for Windows mode with layer 1 as its function layer, and layer 2 is for Mac mode with layer 3 as its function layer. I'm not actually sure what layer 4 is for, and there are actually a lot of map keys that I cannot figure out the functions of. Let's first listen to the Tide75 completely stock as it came out of the box. Frankly, this keyboard does not sound good. It's thin and shrill and noisy. The stock stabilizers do come pre-lubed, but it's clear that they didn't use enough lube. So I went in with a syringe and some Krytox 205 grade 0 to fix these stabs. I also replaced the terrible stock keycaps with my Geek Arc PBT keycaps. This sounds much better, but it's still pretty clacky or high-pitched, which is not what I personally prefer, but at least the really unpleasant sounds are gone now. It's likely the lemon switches that are making the board really clacky, so let's replace them with some lubed Gateron Milky Pro Yellows. I'm not really sure it got less clacky, but it sure did get quiet. Let me know what you heard down in the comments. To close out this sound section, let's compare the Tide75 with the keyboard I reviewed in my last video, the Monsgeek M1V3. Both boards will be using the lubed Gateron Milky Pro Yellow switches, as well as Syracuse ceramic keycaps. Those ceramic keycaps have successfully brought the thought to this keyboard, but it does remain a little bit quiet. To me, the M1V3 sounds livelier with a satisfying pop to its key presses. I think the Tide75 does benefit from some louder switches, but it does tend to lean toward clacky, which is surprising to me since it has the sound-enhancing combo of foam and plastic on top of the PCB. I was under the impression that always led to thought. All in all, the Epomaker Tide75 is a pretty solid keyboard. It has all of the features you could want and doesn't really have any major downsides. Is it worth the price though? If I'd reviewed it before I reviewed the Monsgeek M1V3, I probably would have said yes. But having used the M1 and considering how cheap it can be had for, it's hard for me to recommend the Tide over it. With the newest M1V3 being wireless and VIA compatible, it's now reached feature parity with the Tide while sounding better right out of the box. The only reason to pick the Tide is if you really want one of the colorways it's available in. I actually really like the blue that I got, and it looks so good with the Geek Arc keycaps. I was kind of hoping the Syracuse ceramic keycaps would go well with it too, since they're both blue, but the colors are just off enough to be kind of jarring. And that's my review of the Epomaker Tide75. What do you think about this keyboard? Do you own one? Has your experience matched up with mine? Would you pick this over the M1V3? Let us know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching.